My name is Leanne Heck, and this is my Global Awareness presentation for Public Speaking with Professor Hammers, and this is my audience. AIDS in Africa is a rapidly growing epidemic. It is important for us to be aware of this issue because even though this issue is in Africa, it does not cancel out the possibility of something like this happening in the U.S. We need to educate ourselves about AIDS and show a little compassion to other countries. After reading information about this epidemic from various websites, one including Avert.com, the New York Times, and interviews from people who have seen this issue firsthand, it really inspires me to help with the fight of AIDS. After learning the history of AIDS in Africa and the impact that it has, especially on children, I personally want to educate people on the history and the impact this epidemic has. AIDS in Africa originated from a chimpanzee colony. It was first recorded in the 1930s. By the 1960s, 2,000 people had already been infected. By the early 1970s, AIDS became an epidemic in Africa. In the 1980s, sex was a high risk factor of contracting AIDS, and Uganda was hit very hard, and it became known as the Slim disease. They weren't aware of what AIDS was until a later study. 30% of pregnant women in Uganda in the 1980s were infected with AIDS. In the 1990s, it had increased by a lot. By 1993, it increased 60% in 2 years. 9 million people were infected in the sub-Saharan region. In 1996, there was an organization that coordinated international action and tried to make people aware of this problem and try to get other people to help with the prevention of AIDS. In 1999, Nevirapine, it was a single dose, and it was an injection used to help with mother-to-child transmission. That was a big issue of how people were contracting the disease. In year 2000, 20 million people had already been infected, and only 8,000 of those people had access to treatment. So that really makes it hard to prevent the disease or take it under control when you have so many people that are infected and little amount of medicine to help. So 5 pharmaceutical companies came up with a plan, and they lowered their prices on the drug for them to get so that more people could be getting treatment and to try and lower the amount of people that were infected with AIDS. The New York Times had posted this on May 12th of 2000. In 2007 alone, 1.6 million people had died from AIDS. In 2008, 390,000 children in the sub-Saharan area were infected. I found this on a report that was given over the global AIDS epidemic. Only 30% of the 7 million people who needed immediate care received it. Because of the lack of medical treatment, the life expectancy has drastically decreased. Life expectancy is between the ages of 31 and 36 for those people who are infected with AIDS versus age 62 of people who don't have AIDS. In 2008 alone, 1.4 million adults and children had died. Since this epidemic started, 15 million people have died. Half of the hospital beds are taken by people who have AIDS. This poses a problem when other emergencies come in because they don't have enough room to support the people, and they kind of have to pick and choose who they take in. In Zambia, 40% of midwives are positive for AIDS. AIDS also affects food production because people can't work because they're so sick. It's expected by 2010 for the agricultural workforce, it's supposed to decrease by 14% because they can't work from having AIDS. In Zimbabwe, it's expected to lose over 20% of their workforce. A third of families' income can take up treatment, so that really help. It's hard to support a family when all your money has to go to trying to make you be able to survive. Households, if the income earner dies, it often leaves a mother by herself or a father by himself, and a lot of times both parents will die, and the children will either become an orphan. They're often they move with a family member, or they actually have to become the head of household. They are also child prostitution has become a big issue because they need to support their families, and that's the way that their family goes about getting money to survive. When children have to do this, it robs them of their childhood. They can't go to school, they don't get proper nutrition, they don't have clothes. People or children who don't get to go to school are twice as likely to get AIDS. The school rate has dropped 25 to 30% because of AIDS. What kind of life is that for a child? We put this issue on the back burner because we don't see it every day. We can't possibly understand what these people go through on a day-to-day basis. A Zambian AIDS activist, Winston Zulu, said, "When this whole thing is over, everyone will stop and cry, but at this point we are numb. So I encourage you and challenge you to become more aware of this global issue and find a way that you can make a difference." Thank you.